Well, those were three really, really nice hymns that we sang. Just some of my all-time, probably my three all-time favorites. You'd have to add to that, A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. And yeah, those are just some great, great hymns from the Christian church. Revelation 8, chapter 8, again, if you will turn there, if you're not already there in your Bible. This forms the backdrop to our Bible study tonight. This chapter has shown us 7 angels of God's presence. Maybe a reflection of that verse that we looked at several weeks ago back in Isaiah. I think it's Isaiah 63:9, where the prophet is talking about the experience of the children of Israel in Egypt and in the wilderness. And it says, I'm trying to think of what does it say now that I'm starting to tell you what it says. In all their affliction, he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them or delivered them. So these angels were standing in the presence of God. So these are 7 particular specific angels, each of whom was handed a trumpet by some unnamed heavenly figure. And before they used them, which means before they blew them, we have verses 3 and 4 and 5. That's that parenthetical, that's that digression that is giving us some other information that is definitely related to the trumpets as we saw. I think these are the verses that tell us what's probably actually causing the trumpets to happen. So those 3 verses, which were preaching, pastoral, personal, because we're talking about our prayers, were a little bit of an aside, because as I said a few weeks ago, you can read verse 2 and then go straight to verse 6. 7 angels given 7 trumpets, and these 7 angels with these 7 trumpets did such and such. So it's very easy to see 3, 4, and 5 are a parenthesis. And in that parenthesis, we see the angel of incense who had been given a golden censer. He's before the golden altar. He's been given much incense to offer up with the prayers of all the saints. And that's the story through great symbolism being told there. So whatever you want to make of it, if you want to make it strictly symbolic and there's nothing literal happening like now in heaven, that's fine. However you want to interpret it, I tend to interpret it as actually happening in heaven, and maybe at all moments in heaven. As long as the prayers of the saints are going up, then this incense is being offered up. So these prayers have been ascending for thousands of years. As we looked at, and I think in our study together last time, both the short-term prayers, which are the prayers that we pray about us. Lord, help me. Lord, deliver me from evil. Lord, give me this day my daily bread. Not only those short-term type of personal prayers, but the long-term ones, and that is along the line of, Lord, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, and please bring your kingdom to earth. I think all of those are valid prayers, and all of those are part of the prayers of the saints. The big picture, you'll have some people saying, well, I don't know that God listens to, or I don't even know that it's valid to offer up personal prayers for something that you need in your own life. Well, of course it is, because all those small, little, personal, short-term prayers are part of the big picture of God's will being done on earth, and of Satan being defeated, and of Jesus being glorified, and of God's kingdom coming. So it's all part and parcel. We have these millions of little single prayers that have been offered up, whether by Moses or King David or the Apostle Paul, all down through biblical history, right up until our day. And so you just have this yearning, this corporate, this is what I see in these verses, this corporate yearning for as I say, for God's will to be done, for God's kingdom to come, for all wrongs to be made right. Don't forget the prayers being prayed by the tribulation martyrs under the fifth seal. They're wanting to see vindication for their righteous life and good testimony. And that would only be fair, because if something has been done wrong to them, God promises to punish the wicked. And he just tells them, I'm not going to do it quite yet, but here's a white robe and wait a little longer, because there are more martyrs that are going to experience the same death that you experienced. But eventually, he's going to answer everyone's prayers. All the wrongs made right, eliminate evil from this world, that Jesus' righteous kingdom can come on the earth. I think that what we're being told in these verses leading into the trumpets is that finally, all of our prayers are going to be answered. And it's seen in the symbolism of the empty censer. That censer, which was offering up the incense, is now empty. And what does the angel do with the empty censer? Verse 5, the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from that very same altar, and he threw it down to the earth, or cast it down. I think some translations, it's a pretty strong word here, translate that he hurled it, H-U-R-L-E-D. He hurled it. It's a forceful action down to the earth. So here are the steps. Prayers accepted, fire thrown down to the earth, trumpets blown, and judgments begin to fall. So in some sense, amazingly enough, our prayers, the prayers of all the saints, are a cause for the trumpets to be blown. There is a connection that is made here. In some gracious way, God has allowed us to participate in what He is about to do. And that, of course, will be the trumpets, which, Lord willing, we will get to the first trumpet next week. And as I've said, I think all of this is happening during this silent period of approximately 30 minutes. And that is why the blowing of the trumpets will be such a shock, because it has been a silent period where God has, as I said last time, been ruminating, contemplating over the prayers of the saints. He's entertaining everything they've said, and He is determined to answer them. Of course, He answers some prayers now, but He's going to answer all prayers on a future day in their full meeting and full resolution. So what I want to do tonight is I want to concentrate on verse 6. This is where we're going to be tonight. Verse 6 is fairly easy. You can look at it or you can listen. It just says, and the seven angels, which had the seven trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. Okay, so we're really good, I think, from our past study. We're good on the seven angels. We know what's going on there. We're good on the seven trumpets. They were handed seven trumpets. We're good on that, although we're going to talk a little more about that at the end of tonight. But I want to focus, not now, we're going to come to it before I'm done, with the end of that verse, they prepared themselves to sound. But I have some preliminary things. I have 3 preliminary things that will be interactive and get your mind thinking about a lot of things. This is going to be more technical tonight, not as preachy as last week was. 3 things. Number 1, I want to talk about the relation maintained among these 3 series of judgments. Number 2, I want to look at a timeline or a chart, a prophecy chart, believe it or not. And number 3, I want to look at this 4 plus 3 equals 7 situation that we're seeing with all of these judgments. And I want to explain all of this. So we're going to go in several different areas. But I really think, starting with this first one, the relation of the 3 series of judgments, hopefully I can communicate it in the clearest way that I have so far, so that it helps you in your interpretation of these chapters. Interpreting how these three series of 7, how they are connected, how they are not connected, how they play out, the interpretation of that is just so critical to being able to read the book and understand from chapter 6, where the seals start, through chapter 16, where the bowls stop. So you've got from 6 to 16, you have these 3 series of judgment. So you know what they are. Here's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. We've got the seals, we have the trumpets, and King James calls them vials, but we'll talk about that later, and the bowls. What they are not, what they are not are 3 series of 7 judgments expressed 3 different ways. This is a very popular interpretation, and it has a little bit of merit. I'm going to show you just a few areas where it has a little bit of merit. But what that is saying is that the bowls are the trumpets, are the seals. They're just expressed in a different way. So you don't have anything new. Whatever these 7 are, these 7 are, and these 7 are. So you probably recognize that to be that is the full recapitulation view. That Revelation isn't telling us something new. It's just recapitulatory in what it's saying with the trumpets and with the bowls, that everything goes back to the seals. These are not 7 judgments expressed 3 different ways. But neither are they, nor does this mean, nor do we have 3 A series following a previous one in strict chronological order. In other words, all of these 1 through 7 would happen. Then we would start with this, we'd go 1 through 7. Then we'd start with this, we'd go 1 through 7. That's strict chronological order. And you can see how it would be easy as you're reading the book. If you don't read it carefully, it would be very easy to think this is the way to read it. I saw 7 seals, and I heard 7 trumpets, and now I'm witnessing 7 bowls. Or to follow the recapitulation way, because you say, well, I see some things down here with the bowls that look similar to some of the things in the trumpets. So I don't think it's strictly recapitulatory, and I don't think it is strictly chronological. What I, in my own vocabulary, have referred to it as is broadly chronological. It is broadly chronological. But subtly woven in to this narrative or to this story being told are thematic and artistic elements and theological themes and reflections. And these are the very aspects that disrupt the chronological order. For instance, the 144,000. That's a great example. It interrupts because of the cue that was given to it in verse 17 of chapter 6. The great day of their wrath is come, and who will be able to stand? And we have this interlude where we're given a group of people that will be able to stand. And those are the 144,000. So it's broadly chronological. However, as I always say, there are themes and artistry and reflections that are woven into the story, and that's what interrupts the strict chronological order. However, I do believe that they all occur during this period that we refer to as the tribulation period. But there is some overlapping. There is some retreating, fast forwarding. There is some recapitulation. There are interludes. There are places where there is further elaboration of something that has been given earlier. So you just got to think of, sometimes he's going to retreat, and pause and then restart and then advance past where you just were. And I'm trying to show you that as we go chapter and chapter, and then trying for you also just to be able to understand, and we're going to have a little good practice here in a few moments. You'll see what I mean. But so that you'll be able to understand well enough that you can read ahead yourself and say, this might be referring to something earlier. Or, this seems to be out of order. There's something that seems to be not in order. And you could say, well, I'm okay with that. It doesn't have to be in strict chronological order. All right, here's something else that's really important. And that is, we want to look at this subject, the intensity topic. The intensity increases, watch this, in two ways. It increases both with each new series of judgments, and it also increases within each series of judgments. Let's look at some examples. But keep this in mind. It increases with the arrival of each new series, which means the trumpets are increasing in intensity of judgment over the seals, and then the bowls over the trumpets, and then both of those over the seals. And as we work our way through from 1 to 7 of each of these three series, there is a heightened intensity within as well. So for instance, and you can find your own of these, but some for example. For instance, we haven't gotten to the four trumpets yet. We will, Lord willing, next week we'll be starting with verse 7, and then we've only got through verse 13. There are the first four trumpets. The first four trumpets involve 1/3 of something. 1/3 of something. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that 1/3 of people have been killed. It doesn't say that. It only says under one of them that actually anybody dies, and it just says much people or many people did, although we could assume death under the first and second as well. The trumpets involve 1/3. When we go back to the fourth seal, what happened there? 1/4 of the earth's population was killed. And this 1/3 under the trumpet is not only 1/3, but it's 1/3 of what is left in the world, which means it's even a greater number of something going on, even if it's not strictly death. But I think that's important to see that there is intensity increasing as we go from the seals to the trumpets. Here's another example that I want you to see. We're still talking about going from one series of judgment to the other. The first four seals, seals 1 through 4, the best way to remember them, what I told you a long time ago, the way I remember them, is what that is all about is war and its attendant evils. That's what that's about. War and its attendant evils. Wars start, empires, political governments, they are attacking, battles happen, people are being killed, and then the fallout from that with the famine and the disease and the wild beast and so forth. So God is working, but He's working indirectly. It's not that visible and it's not that noticeable. The trumpets are going to be entirely different, and the bowls are even going to be worse.
Well, until you get to seal 6, and then people realize who's behind it.
Yes, that's right. But I'm only talking about these first four for right now. Yeah, just the first four. God is working, but He's working indirectly. You know, if the first seal, the events that follow the breaking of the first seal were to happen tomorrow, probably nobody would know. There's not any way to recognize that until more things unfold themselves. There would just be some wars, and then it would lead to some bigger wars, and then before you know it, something really serious is going on. And people could have suspected this with the First or Second World War. But, you know, they wrapped up, came to an end, and civilization kept going. So that would not have been an accurate assumption back then. But if you go through these multiple wars and then you see just widespread food shortages, and then you see a quarter of the Earth's population, well, you know we're into the fourth seal. So the first four seals, God is working indirectly. He's working through human agents, through human leaders, through human governments, through human politicians, through human armies, without them even being aware of it. The same thing, we looked at this earlier, the same thing he did throughout the Old Testament. He would raise up one nation to punish another nation, then raise up a third nation to punish the second one. And they all thought they were doing what they wanted to do. And they didn't realize that they were just puppets on a string, that God was causing all that to happen. That's seals 1 through 4. But what do we see when we come to trumpets 1 through 4? I'm just showing you how the intensity is increasing as we move from one series to the next. Now we change gears and we up the ante and we eliminate people being involved. They're not involved at all. This is God working through ecological disasters of the highest order. There are no people causing any of this to happen. And I know we aren't there yet, but look at verse 7 of chapter 8. Hail and fire mingle with blood were cast upon the earth, and a third part of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass. And look at the next one. The second angel sounded, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. And a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. There are no people. This is way beyond just a couple of countries becoming rivals, getting angry with each other, and starting some battle. So you can tell as we go to this next series, things are getting really, really bad. But since we looked at those first two, hold your finger there and just go over to chapter 16, which is way in the advance for us. And let me remind you, what did we just read of the first trumpet? The angel sounded, hail and fire mingle with blood, cast upon the earth. Look at the first bowl. And the first went and poured out his bowl upon the earth, and there fell a noisome, grievous sore upon men which had the mark of the beast, and upon them that had worshipped. The second trumpet, the angel sounded, and this was something as it were of a great mountain that went into the sea. And then look at the second bowl. The second angel poured out his bowl upon the sea. And then if you read down to the third trumpet, you see that that was upon fresh water. And here the third bowl, the third angel poured out his bowl upon the rivers, fresh water, and fountains of waters, and they became blood. So you can see why some people think it's all recapitulatory. But even though there are some similarities, the differences are just vast. I mean, go back and look at the four horsemen and what was predicted there. You don't see that anywhere else in the rest of these. So we're seeing an increased intensity as we go from one series to the next series. And then obviously, if you just look within each of the series, you will also see a corresponding increase in intensity. And we've studied that enough. We've looked at the seals enough. I won't spend any more time with that. Consequently, there is a corresponding hostility against God. This is what is amazing. We're going to look at a couple of passages here, and this is just in preview to where we'll be, who knows, guys, months from now. But as these judgments increase, rather than there being widespread, mass, wholesale repentance, there's just the opposite, which we wouldn't expect. But it's just the nature of mankind, and it's definitely the report of Revelation, that as the intensity of these judgments grows, so do people's opposition to God. So look in chapter 9, just the last couple of verses, We're through, by this time in the book, we're through with 6 of the 7 trumpets. And look at verse 20. The rest of the men which were not killed, yet repented not of the works of their hands. In verse 21, neither repented they of their murders. And then if you go over to chapter 16, now we're all the way into the bowls, the bowl judgments being poured out. And what do we read in verse 9? After the 4th bowl has been poured out, men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, which hath power over these plagues. He's the one who, since he has the power, to whom you should be crying out for mercy so that you can be saved from them. He's the one who has the power. He's the one who has caused them to be scorched. And it says they blasphemed God, and they repented not to give him the glory. And there are other verses. Verse 11 says they blasphemed God, and verse 21, they blasphemed God. This is the chapter on blaspheming God because of the punishment these people are experiencing. Okay, so hopefully with that little bit of information, you can continue to work your way through as you're reading the book and put the pieces of the puzzle together as far as the relationship of the seals to the trumpets to the judgments. Now let's come to part 2 tonight. And this will be a lot of fun because this is something I loathe to do. As you know, I do not like timelines and prophecy charts. But you're okay if you just hit the highlights, and that's all we're going to do. You are a dog with really short legs, lost in tall weeds. If you want to fill this whole thing up and place every seal and every trumpet and every bowl. And I say that simply because I don't think we have enough information. This is our timeline. This is the beginning of it. This is the end of it. So we know, well, let me say this. At the end of human history in this age, there's going to be a uniquely fateful period of time at the very close of this age. We've looked at some verses before that said there's never been a time like this before. There'll never be a time like this after. Jeremiah 30 and verse 7 is one. It says, the day of the Lord, there's none like it. It's even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he will be saved out of it. Joel 2 and verse 2 talks about this day of darkness and gloom. Jesus in Matthew 24 and verse 21. So there'll be a time of tribulation such as not since the beginning of time. It's a terrible, terrible time. So we know that at the end of this age, Jesus said, neither in this age or the age to come will there be something as bad as this. And so we know that that's coming upon the world. We don't know when, but we know that it's coming. How long will this uniquely fateful period of time be? It evidently is going to last 7 years. Now here's where we get into some very specific things. We got lots of verses that say, this is a whole book of Revelation. Tells us there's going to be a terrible time in human history. Okay, when is that going to be? It's going to be at the end. Okay, we're all good on that. That's real generic and real broad. How long is that going to last? Evidently, it's going to last 7 years. How do we know that? We know that from 2 streams of evidence, from 2 different streams of evidence. Number 1, we know that from Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. That's the first and the critical passage, but it has some supporting passages or verses, as we'll look at here in just a moment, or I'll at least reference them. We'll end up looking at this. This is a complicated passage, one of the most important in all of Bible prophecy because it gives us all of these numbers. And we'll look at it by the time we get to maybe chapters 11 and 12 and 13 of Revelation. What you have here is Daniel's so-called 70 weeks. And we'll always refer to it by that because that's just the popular name. But that's not what the Hebrew Bible says. What the Hebrew Bible says is that there, in this 24th verse, is there is determined upon Israel 70, here's what it says, 70 sevens. We're not told, we don't know right from that phrase whether it's 7 days, whether it's 7 weeks, whether it's 7 months, or whether it's 7 years. We just don't know just from that. But if we're patient and we keep building, then we learn some more things. Your Bible, King James Bible, will call it weeks. But it's weeks of years is what it's going to end up being. It's not days, it's not months, it's actual years. So that's 490 years is what that would amount to. 490 years, 70 times 7 years. With each one of these sevens being a period of 7 years. Gets really complicated, and trust me, we are not going into that tonight. I just got to tell you a few things to lay the foundation. I'll always call it Daniel 70 weeks because that's just cool. That's what all prophecy students have always called it. I'm not going to call it Daniel 77s. You know, what are you talking about? We're going to always call it Daniel 70 weeks. And so Daniel's 70th week, the last one, of those 490, the last one is this period right here. Another way that we know that it's 7 years is that there are at least 7 places that I can think of, and I might have even missed one, and if I miss one, you can correct me or I'll correct myself in the future. There are at least 7 places where a time period is given. And it's given very clearly. Well, in some of the passages, very clearly. When you look at all of them, you know that they're all referring to the same length of time. And guess what they happen to be? They happen to be exactly half of this 7-year period. So remember what I said earlier. There's 2 ways we know that how long this, what we call the tribulation period lasts, that it lasts 7 years. One is from Daniel 9, 24 to 27, and the other is from these places where we find that divided in halves. So you find one of those places in Daniel 7. You find one of those places in Daniel 12. Then the other 5 are going to be here in our book of Revelation. 2 in chapter 11, 2 in chapter 12, and 1 in chapter 13. So that's at least, that I can think of, 7 places. And it's referred to under different terms. In some places, it's called 42 months. Well, guess what? Do the math on that and find out what that equals. That's 3.5 years. In other places, it's called 1,260 days. 1,260 days. Do the math on that based on a 30-day month, just a normal average. And guess what that is? 3.5 years. In other places, it's called a time. 1 times, that would be 2.5 times. I mean, this is right in your Bible in these passages. Daniel 7, Daniel 12, twice in Revelation 11, twice in Revelation 12, once in Revelation 13. A time, which is 1, times, which is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3.5 time. And the other place, there's only one other way that it's referred to, and that is a time, times, and the dividing of a time. How about that? That's a half time. So in all of these places, when you put Daniel 9, 24 to 27 with these other places, then we're going to assume this, that what you end up with is a period of 7 years. And that's not surprising. There are 7 churches. There are 7 parts to each of these 3 series of judgments. There were 7 days of creation. There were 7 horns, 7 spirits, 7 eyes. I mean, if you ended up with a period of tribulation that was 8 years and 4 months, you might want to think about your prophecy, because that just doesn't fit anything. Or if it was 4 years and 11 months. But presto, it's 7 years. It is 7. So it makes sense with everything else in the Bible. So we know that it's divided in half. So let's say here is half. And so here is year 1, here is year 2, here is year 3, here is 4, 5, 6, and there's the end. Here is our exercise for tonight. Let's, what can we place? What can we place on this? This is where people have so much fun. What can we place based on what we know on this timeline of a 7-year period? Well, when does Jesus return? At the end, right? So here's the second advent. We know when that's happening. That's here at the end. What starts the tribulation? According to Matthew 24, 3 and 4, they ask him, what's the sign of your coming? And then he tells them, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars, but don't be afraid. Those things must happen. And what is the first seal? The first seal is that white horse and the bow and without the arrow and all of that stuff. So first seal is way back here. You know, what else can we, and we're only going to play with this for a few moments tonight. Where does the 6th seal go on this whole chart? The 6th seal at the very end. Where does the 7th trumpet go? It's at the very end. 7th trumpet. Where does the 7th bowl go? It's also at the very end. We know those. What about the sealing of the 144,000? Well, that's kind of fluid. We don't know, but we know, we just know a few things. We know this, that if our if our interpretation, that's exactly right. That's where I was going. If our interpretation was right, that the reason that they are sealed is to be protected, and the reason that they are protected is so they can stay here on the earth and accomplish something, then it makes sense with that great host, that great multitude of people in the second vision of Revelation 7 might be the result of the evangelism of the people of the first vision of Revelation chapter 7. So we can't put them way down here. They have no time to do anything. We've got to put them back here somewhere, but we just don't know exactly where. Where does that happen, the sealing of the 144,000, in relation to the first trumpet being blown? Well, that we know it's going to precede it. Because remember when we read those first verses in chapter 7, there were 4 mighty angels holding back these 4 winds of destruction before they blew upon the earth. Had to seal those men first. And what happens with these first trumpets is the great blowings of the winds and all of this disturbance upon the earth. So when you get to the middle, this is really chapters 11 and 12 and 13, because those are the 3 chapters I said that gave you this business of 42 months, 1,260 days, times and a half time, times and a dividing of a time. That's where you find that. So when we get to the middle, we're pretty confident of a lot of things going on there. When we come across these references, all we have to figure out was this. Is he talking about the first half, or is he talking about the second half? He's not talking about from the first quarter to the third quarter. It's definitely divided in half. It's just a matter of, is it the first half or is it the second half? So there are other passages that aren't here in Revelation that will tie into this whole broad study. Passages like Matthew 24:15, where Jesus said, when you see the abomination that makes desolate in the holy place, as prophesied by Daniel the prophet, when you see that happen, then let him that's in Jerusalem flee. When you tie that into Daniel 9, which talks about the same thing, and when you go over to Revelation chapters 11 and 12 and 13, because those are all going to be tied in together, you see that hugely significant things are happening right here in the middle. Israel has evidently been at peace prior. Israel is no longer at peace afterwards. Something has caused that disruption. So you figure in the appearance of the two prophets. We know that these two witnesses who are going to prophesy in Jerusalem in chapter 11, they are happening in relation to the center, the middle of the tribulation. They're either going to prophesy up to that or they're going to prophesy from their past. We'll get to that a little bit later. But people who go to a timeline like this and try to put all of the trumpets and all of the bowls on there, I just don't think there's any way you can, with any type of confidence or authority, do that. Now, the deeper you study, maybe the better you'll be at positioning some of these. I would simply say that I think with the exception of the sixth seal, that all the seals are happening during the first half of the tribulation. I think the tribulation period gets increasingly worse. And so the trumpets are either happening some before the middle point, some after the middle point. I don't know. I think the bowls are definitely happening towards the end, or at least past the middle of the tribulation point. And you got all kinds of other things. What about the actual appearance in Revelation of the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist? He's got to come on the scene at some time. And I think Revelation and 2 Thessalonians 2 and Daniel's prophecy will help us out with that. And there are so many things that I have skipped over just on my little brief foray into something that I loathe, and that is to try to date all of these things. We can date just what we can, and that's about it. But you could pick anything you want to pick, such as the mark of the beast. When is that going to come about? I don't think that's happening here. I think that's happening after he comes on the scene. What about Armageddon? We're introduced to Armageddon in Revelation 16:16. But what is Armageddon? Is it a battle or is it a war? What's going on with Armageddon? It's obviously not back here at the beginning. It's somewhere here towards the end. So did that help any, or does all that do is confuse?
No, it helps.
To see a line and think as we go along, just figure out, do I know enough? Do I have enough information to place something, if not perfectly, approximately? And if you can place it approximately, that's probably, for the most part, on so many of these things, as good as you're going to be able to do. Okay? Fair enough on that? All right, let's come to the third and final subdivision of what I want to talk about tonight, and that's this little arithmetic of 4 plus 3. Told you it would be technical tonight. This 4 plus 3 is never 3 plus 4 or any other combination of numbers to equal 7. It's very noticeable here in the book of Revelation. It's a little math problem. It's very noticeable in Revelation. It's seen in all 3 of these series of judgments. It's especially obvious in the first 2. If you'll remind yourself of the seals, what do we have to start it? We have the 4 horsemen, and they're just totally unique. So we have the 4 horsemen plus the next 3 equals the 7. It's extremely noticeable with the trumpets. We're going to have it again. What do we have? And I know we're not there yet, but I know you've read ahead. We have these 4 ecological disasters in chapter 8. And then look at the last verse of chapter 8. Does it not say, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpets of the three angels which have yet to sound. We have the 4 ecological disasters of chapter 8, and then we have woe, 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 3, which is trumpet 5, 6, and 7. And each time it comes to one of those, it calls it a woe. So we know that the 4 in chapter 8 are separated from the next 3, 2 of which will be in 9, and the other one will not happen until chapter 11. And some of this I know is probably flying. It's not going over your head because it's not difficult, but it might be flying past the front of your face because you might not know all of this yet, and I'm talking quickly. And then if you go to chapter 16, we still see this 4 plus 3 equals 7. It's not as easy to see it here, but you still see it. And maybe I shouldn't spend that much time, but if you just read the first 4, which is verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 8, it's something poured out on the earth or on the water. But then look at the 5th, which would be the first of 3, right? You've got the 4. Now we're coming to 5, 6, and 7. So look at verse 10. The 5th angel poured out his bowl upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. Where the earlier 4 had something to do with the earth or with the waters. And then look at verse 12. And the 6th poured his out on this particular river Euphrates, and that water was dried up, and it prepared the way for the kings of the east so that they could travel wherever they're getting ready to travel. Very interesting, totally unusual bowl there. So this 4 plus 3 is not an accident. It's clearly discernible in the book of Revelation. And it's actually not unique to Revelation. It regularly occurs in the Bible. And I don't have a really great explanation for why it occurs, if there is some reason in the mind of God, or if it was more, a memorization aid, a mnemonic aid. Anytime you have things either numerically or phonetically, it makes it easier for people to remember. Whether God did it for that reason, I'm not for sure. But it's just a regular characteristic when it comes to judgment that you'll see 4 plus 3 equals 7. But we're still always getting to that number 7. I'm just going to give you 2 examples of this. One less obvious and one very obvious. And they're both in the Old Testament. I'll tell you the first one and we'll look at the second one. Let me tell you the less obvious one. And you can find other places where you see this 4 plus 3. The less obvious is in the book of Ezekiel. So every Bible teacher, commentator will come up with their own way to outline a book. There are various ways to outline books. The easiest way to outline, this is 1 through 48 chapters. The easiest way to outline Ezekiel, and it's just really broad, and it doesn't cover something, it's really broad, is right down the middle. And say chapters 1 to 24, and then chapters 25 to 48. Watch how this works. This first section is all judgment. God said, you have sinned. I'm pouring out my fury and wrath upon you. And that is the destruction of the city. Ezekiel finds out supernaturally in chapter 24, 586 BC, the city has fallen. It's the same day his wife dies. God takes the delight, the pleasure of his eyes from him. That's a sign to him. It's a sign to everyone around. Terrible thing. She was a good woman. They had a great marriage, but she died the same day. This was all judgment. From chapters 25 through 48, the tables have turned. God said, my fury has been poured out. My anger is satisfied. And now, Ezekiel, his tongue is free. He's only been able to prophesy judgment prior. He is free now to tell of a glorious, glorious future for Israel. When you get to the later chapters, it's obvious. Chapter 36 in Ezekiel, God said, I'll pour my spirit out on the whole nation and give you all a new heart and a new spirit. In chapter 37, you have the vision of the valley of dry bones. In chapters 38 and 39, the destruction of Gog and Magog. And then 40 to 48, this glorious millennial temple. It's easy to see that this section is a prediction of blessing. But in the first part of it, in chapters 25 through 32, guess what Ezekiel does? Well, one way you could predict the glorious future of the people of God is to, first of all, predict the destruction of their enemies. Before you even really talk about them, before we get to how good your life's going to be, one way to get us there is to annihilate all your enemies. And that's what these chapters are talking about. They're judgments against the nations. And so in chapter 25, guess what? In one chapter, he has 4 smaller nations. From 26 through 32, he has Tyre, Sidon, its twin city up on the Phoenician coast, and Egypt. 4 plus 3 equals 7. Now, maybe the average person wouldn't see that when you're reading, but it's fairly clear that there are 4 prophecies in chapter 25 against foreign nations, and then all those next chapters are longer prophecies, except there is a short one about Sidon, but a big one about Tyre, and a big one about Egypt.
Before were Moab, you can't remember, right? But there's
Ammon, Moab, Edom, and Philistia. There you go in chapter 25.
Yep.
The place where it is easier to see, if you'll just quickly look at this, and then I want to wrap up tonight, is the little minor prophet of Amos. Joel, Amos, Obadiah. Because this is very clear to see the 4 plus 3. You'll see it all in chapter 1 and the first few verses of chapter 4. Look at verse 3. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4. And look at verse 6. Amos chapter 1 and verse 3. It's very repetitive and it's obviously done on purpose. Verse 6, thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza and for 4. And verse 9, for 3 transgressions of Tyre and for 4. And you work your way on through this chapter and into chapter 2. You got smaller judgments on some smaller nations, and then you've got some bigger judgments that are going to fall on some bigger nations. I'm just showing you that this business in the book of Revelation of 4 plus 3 equals 7, it's not unique to the book. It's actually seen and done this way throughout the Old Testament. And then, we've already said this before, but that the last trumpet and the last bowl are happening at the end, and they're also happening when the 6th seal happens, and you see a separation with the seals and the trumpets. They're separated by a big interlude. We've already looked at the seal interlude, and that was chapter 7. All right, so if you could, and go back with me, we're going to wrap up. I really want to get to the end of verse 6 of Revelation 8. It's a really significant introduction to what's going to begin to happen in verse 7. And the 7 angels, we know about them, which had the 7 trumpets, prepared themselves to sound. What does that mean? What's the significance of that? Well, do you remember when we first began this chapter and did our little brief study on the trumpets? We went back to Numbers chapter 10, and we saw where God had prescribed the 2 special sacred silver trumpets that were to be made. And those trumpets served a variety of purposes. And we read if we didn't read it, at least I alluded to that, and I think you might have read it as I was talking. The trumpets were to tell Israel it's time to go forward. You know, they're camped out in the wilderness. The trumpets would be blown when it's time to stop. You know, they are going through the wilderness being led by this cloudy pillar in front of them. But this is a mass of several million people. When that cloud stops, just because it stops, which is a signal it's time to stop, doesn't mean everybody at the back of the trail knows that it's time to stop. You know, otherwise you're just going to have a pile up like you do in a fog on an interstate. So what do you have? You have the blowing. God had very practical reasons for everything. You had a blowing of the trumpet. So there were certain notes designated for this means to go forward, this means to stop, this is a New Year blast, this is a Holy Day blast. But one of the really, really important reasons for the blowing of the trumpets was to go out to battle. And we read there in Numbers 10, God said, when you blow the trumpets, God will remember Israel. Yeah. And he will go forth and he will fight for them. And we looked in that study, by the time you get into the prophetic section of the Old Testament, the major and minor prophets, that's where the trumpet is almost always seen in the context of war. It's an eschatological context. It's a context of war. And a verse that I quoted earlier, but we didn't look at, but maybe we should, is Paul's interesting use of this in his first epistle to the Corinthians, when he's not talking about eschatology or wars. He's talking about speaking in tongues. But he uses this idea of the trumpet. In 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 6, Paul said, now, brethren, if I come unto you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you? Except I can speak either by revelation or by knowledge or by prophesying or by doctrine. He said, even things without life-giving sound, in other words, just an inanimate object, whether it's a pipe or a harp, except they give a distinction in the sounds, how shall it be known what's piped or harped? And then look at verse 8. And if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, in other words, if it blows the signal for the Israelites to celebrate the first day of the year, and really what they need to be blowing is we're getting ready to be attacked, then they're going to be in trouble. He said, if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to battle? Who shall prepare himself to battle? And then if you will look over in Ezekiel 33, I want to read just a couple of verses here as I'm wrapping up tonight and tying this in to Revelation 8:6. In Ezekiel 33, Ezekiel is giving a prophecy of, well, let's just read it, because we only have to get a few verses. Ezekiel 33:1. Again, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people, and say unto them, when I bring the sword upon a land, notice who brings it. And this is even upon Israel. If the people of the land take a man of their coast and set him for their watchman, if when he seeth the sword come upon the land, he blow the trumpet and warn the people, then whosoever heareth the sound of the trumpet and taketh not warning, if the sword come and take him away, in other words, he dies, his blood shall be upon his own head. Let me just back up to say this. The silver trumpets are long gone. Those 2 silver trumpets were needed as they marched through the wilderness headed to the promised land. They've been in the promised land for 1,000 years by the time we're reading Ezekiel. They've been in the promised land for 1,000 years. Having 2 silver trumpets isn't going to do any good, since they are no longer in one group or column of people. They are living in villages and towns and cities all over Israel. So those villages and towns would have a surrounding wall. The people normally lived in houses within the walls, but outside the walls is where your flocks were, where your gardens were, where you did so much of your business and so much of your work. So the picture here is of a frontier town, somewhere on the outskirts of Israel, that is walled, that has a population where the people live in the city, but they work outside the city, tending to their flocks and herds. He said, you need to have a watchman appointed that stands on that wall. And what his one responsibility to do is to be a lookout. And when he can see, I see the enemy coming, then before they get there, he does what? He blows the trumpet that tells everyone we're in trouble. Everyone heads in to the city and they close the gates and put the bars across that. So people in these cities were supposed to appoint for themselves a sentry or a sentinel to have a horn, to be able to blow the horn. What happens if we have an apathetic, sleepy watchman? Well, let's continue reading. Verse 5. He heard the sound of the trumpet, took not warning, his blood will be upon himself. Verse 6. But if the watchman sees the sword coming and doesn't blow the trumpet, and the people aren't warned, well, if the sword comes and takes any person from among them, then he's dead. He's taken away. But his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. And then he tells Ezekiel, in light of that, in light of this normal, regular Jewish practice, so thou, O Son of Man, I have set you as a watchman to the house of Israel. And that's what his whole ministry was. Not to blow a literal trumpet, but to warn them with the prophetic voice. Exactly. God took something from their own natural environment, the cities and towns and villages where they lived, and then he said, now, Ezekiel, you are to warn my people. I only use that passage, and I'm going to close with this tonight, guys, back to Revelation 8, to say this. Unlike that sleepy, pathetic sentry who might blow, who might not blow, who might see, who might say, well, maybe that's just a herd of some animals. I see dust, but maybe that's not for real. Unlike anyone in Israel who failed to blow the trumpet, unlike them, these angels are not going to fail. Revelation 8:6, the seven angels which had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. What does that mean? I think what it's saying is they've been holding the trumpet all along, and now they lift the trumpet to their mouth and prepare to sound. And I don't think, with the exception of verse 1, that there's any scarier verse in this chapter. The first verse is scary because of this moment of silence, that there was a hush that fell over all of heaven whenever Jesus broke the seventh seal. And now we have this long period, a half an hour of silence, of, as I said, anticipation, expectation, pins and needles, as it were. And now things really get scary because these angels who have been passively standing there holding their trumpets now prepare themselves to sound. They have picked up the trumpets to their mouth and they are getting ready to blow. And as John is seeing the vision, as the readers in the churches in Asia heard this read to them, as we hear it read to us, or as we read it ourselves, then there is a process where anticipation is built up. It creates suspense. It makes us hold our breath to see what is getting ready to happen. Yeah. The seven angels, which had the seven trumpets, now lift them to their mouth. They prepare to sound. And si Deus volente, if God is willing, we'll look at the first angel blowing his first trumpet next week.
And with many crowds Son of Man, who every grief hath known, that wrings the human breast, and takes and bears them for his own, that all in him may rest. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphed o'er the grave, and rose victorious in the strife for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of love, behold his hands and side, those wounds yet visible above, in beauty glorified. All hail, Redeemer, hail, for thou hast died for me. Thy praise and glory shall not fail throughout eternity. Crown him with many crowns, the Lamb upon his throne. Hark how the heavenly anthem drowns, O music but its own. Awake my soul and sing of him who died for thee, and hail him as thy matchless King throughout eternity. Crown him the Son of God before the worlds began, and ye who tread where he hath trod, crown him the Son of Man, who every grief hath known, that wrings the human breast, and takes and bears them for his own, that all in him may rest. Crown him the Lord of life, who triumphed o'er the grave, and rose victorious in the strife for those he came to save. His glories now we sing, who died and rose on high, who died eternal life to bring, and lives that death may die. Crown him the Lord of love, behold his hands and side,